The day my husband handed me a folder across the kitchen table, the same table we'd picked out together at a IKEA in Coquitlam 11 years ago, I remember thinking how strange it was that he'd used a folder. Like this was a business meeting, like we were colleagues wrapping up a project that hadn't worked out. "It's done, Serena," he said. "I want a divorce." I didn't cry. I didn't even set down my coffee. What he didn't know, what neither he nor his mother had any idea about, was that I had been ready for that folder for almost 2 years. Let me go back to the beginning because that part matters. My husband and I met in our late 20s at a firm in Vancouver where we both worked in financial planning. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, effortlessly, dangerously, in a way that you only recognize in hindsight was always slightly performative. His name was Ryan. His mother's name was Judith. I should have paid more attention to Judith from the start. We got married in 2014 in a small ceremony in Kelowna, at a vineyard his family had rented. My parents flew in from Halifax. His mother stood at the front of the seating, like she was the one being married off, greeting guests as though the whole thing were her production. When the officiant asked who gives this woman, she leaned over to my father-in-law and whispered something I couldn't hear. My father told me later she'd said, "He could have done better." I told myself it was nerves, that she was just one of those mothers, that it would get better once she saw how much I loved her son. It didn't get better. For the first 3 years I managed it. The comments about my cooking at family dinners in Burnaby, the way she'd ask Ryan questions about our finances directly, as if I weren't sitting right there. The Christmas she bought him a new winter coat and got me a coupon book for a spa she'd found through a flyer, the kind with the blurry photos and the suspiciously long disclaimer at the bottom. Ryan always laughed it off. "That's just how she is," he'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." He said it so many times it became a kind of mantra between us, a way of closing doors before I could walk through them. What changed wasn't one big thing. It never is. It was slow, the way water gets into concrete. A small crack here, a freeze, a thaw. Then one day you look at the foundation and it's already compromised. In 2019, Ryan's firm offered him a partnership opportunity that required a significant capital buy-in, $250,000. We had savings, mostly mine, built before the marriage from years of careful planning, and a modest inheritance from my grandmother in New Brunswick, and a joint investment account we'd been building together. He came home excited, spreadsheets printed, already talking about the equity split and the 5-year return projections. I said we should talk to our financial advisor first. He said there wasn't time. I asked if we could at least review the partnership agreement together. He got frustrated. "You always do this," he said, though I wasn't sure what this referred to. Being careful? Asking questions? We invested the money. The partnership took 3 years to show any return, and in the meantime Ryan stopped including me in the firm's quarterly updates. He said it was boring. He said I'd already signed off on everything. He said I should trust him. I did trust him, and while I was trusting him, I started noticing other things. A second phone that appeared in the glove compartment of his car one evening in November. Receipts from hotels in downtown Vancouver on weeknights when he'd claimed to be at industry dinners. A woman's name that kept appearing in his calendar as client meeting on Friday afternoons. I didn't confront him. I know that surprises people when I tell them this part, but I'd watched enough of my friends go through their own divorces to understand something. Confronting a person who has been lying to you only tells them it's time to cover their tracks more carefully. I needed to know the full scope of what was happening before I said a word, so I paid attention, quietly, methodically, the same way I'd approached every financial plan I'd ever built for a client. What I found over the following 14 months was worse than I had expected, and I had already expected bad. Ryan had been funneling money from our joint account in small, irregular amounts, never enough in one transfer to trigger our bank's alert threshold, but consistent. I went back through 18 months of statements and calculated it out on a Saturday afternoon while he was at his mother's house in Burnaby. The total was just over $68,000. It had gone to an account I didn't recognize. I hired a forensic accountant through a firm in Richmond that a lawyer friend had recommended. Her name was Dr. Park. She was methodical and expressionless in the way I most respect in professionals, and she confirmed within 6 weeks that the account receiving those transfers was registered under a numbered company that Ryan had opened 3 years earlier. The company held two assets, a small investment portfolio, and a 20% ownership stake in a condo near Olympic Village that he had purchased without my knowledge using funds from our joint account. He had bought property with our shared money and kept it entirely off our marital balance sheet. There was more. While reviewing the documentation Dr. Park had gathered, I found that Ryan had also refinanced our home. A detached house in East Vancouver that we had purchased together in 2016 and that sat in both our names, without my signature on the mortgage documents. The signature on the refinancing paperwork was mine, except that I had never signed it. I took those documents to a notary, then to a lawyer. Then I sat very still in the lawyer's office on West Georgia while she explained to me, in a quiet and measured tone, exactly what my options were. I didn't tell Ryan any of this. I went home, made dinner, asked about his day, and listened to him talk about the Canucks game. I had started building my own file. The call from my aunt in Fredericton came on a Tuesday morning in early March. My mother's older sister, she'd always been the practical one in the family, the one who kept the important papers in a fireproof box and never missed a TFSA contribution deadline. She told me that my great-uncle, a man I'd met perhaps 4 times in my life, had passed away and left his estate to be divided among the next generation. My share, she said, came to just under $400,000. I thanked her. I hung up the phone. I sat at the kitchen table for a long moment. Then I called my lawyer. I told no one else, not my parents, not my best friend Claudette in Calgary, not Ryan, especially not Ryan. Because I knew, with a clarity that had been building for over a year, that if Ryan found out about that money, whatever was coming next would get much more complicated. 2 weeks later, he handed me the folder. "It's done, Serena," he said. "I want a divorce." I set my coffee down on the counter. I looked at him for a moment. He had the expression of a man who had rehearsed this, who had timed it, who believed he was in control of the situation. I recognized it. I'd seen it across boardroom tables from people who had all the facts wrong. "Okay," I said. He blinked. He had expected tears or argument or both. "I'll have my lawyer call yours," I said, and I went upstairs. What I didn't know at the time was that Ryan had already been in contact with a real estate agent. I found out 8 days later when Judith showed up at the house, not to the front door but directly into the kitchen through the side entrance, using a key I had not given her, with a woman I didn't recognize carrying a measuring tape and a clipboard. "The listing goes up next week," Judith said, looking past me at the kitchen dimensions. "You'll want to be out by the end of the month." I looked at the woman with the clipboard. She had the practiced neutrality of someone who had been warned in advance that this visit might be awkward. "Could you give us a minute?" I said to her. She stepped outside. "Judith," I said, "this house is in both our names. Ryan does not have the authority to list it without my consent. I would suggest you call your agent and explain that to her before there are consequences." Judith looked at me with the particular expression she'd been perfecting for 11 years, the one that communicated without a single word, that she considered me temporary. "Ryan has power of attorney," she said. "It's already been handled." I didn't respond to that. I walked to the side door and held it open until she left. Then I called my lawyer and told her what had just happened. My lawyer, whose name was Patricia Eng, and who had 30 years of family law experience and the demeanor of someone who had seen every variation of this particular kind of audacity, was quiet for a moment. "Send me the photos you took of the documents on the clipboard," she said. I had taken photos. Of course I had. She called me back in 2 hours. "The power of attorney Ryan presented to the real estate agent is forged," she said. "Your signature was not witnessed by the required notary, and the document number traces back to a template that hasn't been in legal use in British Columbia since 2011. Also, and I want you to listen carefully, the house cannot be sold in any straightforward way right now, because when Ryan refinanced the mortgage without your legal consent, the lender's security interest was recorded incorrectly. There are flags on the title. The real estate agent your mother-in-law brought in would have discovered this the moment she ran a title search." I was quiet. "Serena," Patricia said in a tone I hadn't heard from her before, "this isn't just a divorce matter anymore. What he's done constitutes fraud." The next part happened faster than I expected. Patricia had already filed a lis pendens on the property, which meant no sale could proceed without court approval. She had also been in contact with a forensic specialist at CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, because the undisclosed numbered company and the unreported investment income attached to it represented a significant compliance problem for Ryan, one he had apparently not anticipated anyone would discover. 2 days after Judith's visit to the house, Ryan came home to find me sitting in the living room with Patricia and a woman from the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the three of us. He looked at the folder of documents on the coffee table. "Ryan," Patricia said pleasantly, "please sit down." His face did something complicated. I watched it. "I'd like to explain a few things to you," Patricia said. "About the property, about the numbered company, about the refinancing documents, and about what happens next." He sat down. It took 40 minutes. I said almost nothing. I didn't need to. Patricia laid it out in the even, factual tone of someone reading a perfectly constructed report: the transfers, the forged signature, the undisclosed assets, the condo near Olympic Village that CRA was now very interested in. When she finished, the room was quiet. Ryan looked at me. For the first time in years, he didn't look charming. He looked small. "I didn't know about the CRA issue," he said, which was perhaps the most expensive sentence he had ever spoken. Judith's role in the fraud came out during discovery. She had not simply been a passive beneficiary of Ryan's deception, she had been an active participant. It was her notary connection, a man she'd known for years through her church community in Burnaby, who had provided the template used for the forged power of attorney. Text messages between them, retrieved legally through the disclosure process, showed her guiding Ryan through the timeline of when to file the listing, how to handle the situation with Serena, and most damningly, a message from 8 months earlier in which she wrote, "Just make sure it's done before she finds out about the Fredericton money." She knew about the inheritance. Ryan had apparently found a piece of mail, a preliminary letter from my aunt's estate lawyer, that I had left in a jacket pocket. He had told his mother. They had accelerated their plan. What they had not counted on was that I had already known, for 14 months, exactly what they were doing. Patricia presented the text messages in court. I watched Judith's face when they were read aloud. It was the first time I had ever seen her look uncertain. The proceedings took 8 months. I am going to be honest. It was not a pleasant 8 months. There were weeks when I couldn't sleep past 4 in the morning. There was a stretch in July when I drove to a Tim Hortons in New Westminster at 6 a.m. 3 mornings in a row just to sit somewhere bright and ordinary and drink a coffee without feeling the weight of the house around me. I stayed in the house throughout. Patricia had advised me to, both legally and practically, but some mornings it felt less like a home and more like an evidence exhibit I happened to be sleeping inside. Claudette flew in from Calgary for a weekend in August. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She made pasta, we watched 2 seasons of something on television, and she drove me to Pacific Spirit Park on Sunday morning, where we walked for 2 hours without talking about Ryan at all. That was what I needed. Sometimes people know. By September, the picture was fully assembled. Ryan's numbered company was dissolved by court order. The condo near Olympic Village was liquidated, and the proceeds, after legal costs, were directed to compensate the joint marital estate. The $68,000 in undisclosed transfers was accounted for in the asset division. The forged refinancing documents resulted in a separate finding against Ryan, and the lender initiated its own claim against him for the title irregularities. Judith's notary connection lost his license. She was named as a party in the civil proceeding and held jointly liable for the legal costs associated with the fraudulent power of attorney. And Ryan, who had sat across that kitchen table with his printed folder, who had handed me a business meeting when I had been expecting a marriage, Ryan pled guilty to 1 count of fraud and received a conditional sentence with 18 months of supervised probation. His law partner, who had known nothing about any of it, called me personally to apologize. He didn't have to do that, I appreciated it. The divorce was finalized on a gray Thursday in November. Patricia called me while I was at a client meeting, and I excused myself to take the call in the hallway. "It's done," she said. I thanked her. I went back into the meeting. I got through the rest of the afternoon. That evening I drove to the seawall and parked near Kitts Beach, and sat in my car for a while watching the water. The North Shore Mountains were doing what they do in November, going in and out of cloud, showing themselves and then disappearing again. I thought about the morning Ryan had handed me that folder. How confident he had looked. How certain he was that he was the one in control of what came next. I thought about Judith and her key to the side entrance, the way she had walked into my kitchen like she already owned it. I thought about my great-uncle in Fredericton, a man I barely knew, who had left me something that became, in ways he could never have anticipated, exactly the thing I needed to protect myself. The inheritance cleared into my personal account the following week. $387,000 after fees and taxes. My share of the marital estate, once Ryan's undisclosed assets were folded in and the forensic accounting was settled, added another $212,000. I bought a condo in Kitsilano. Small, bright, with a window in the kitchen that faces west. In the late afternoon, the light comes in and sits on the counter, and it is, without question, the most peaceful kitchen I have ever cooked in. Last spring, I ran into one of Ryan's colleagues at a conference in Toronto. She didn't know I knew her. She told me, making conversation, that Ryan had moved to Calgary and was doing consulting work, which is the professional equivalent of a plant trying to root and gravel. I nodded. I wished her a good conference. I got on my flight home to Vancouver, watched the Rockies through the window at 30,000 feet, and thought about nothing in particular. That's the thing no one tells you about getting through something like this. You expect to feel triumphant, or vindicated, or at minimum dramatically resolved. What you actually feel when it's over is something quieter. A kind of settled weight in your chest. Not happiness exactly. More like the feeling of finally being in a room where the walls are straight, and the floor is level, and everything in it is actually yours. I made dinner that evening in my kitchen in Kitsilano. I opened a bottle of BC Red that a friend had given me and poured one glass and stood at the window while the sun went down behind the water. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't think about any of it at all.